Friends, I would like to share with you the curious arguments of a Swiss journalist who recently visited Moscow and even asked Vladimir Putin a question. According to him, Russia cannot be defeated, and instead of conflict, we need to think about friendship. Putin is stronger than ever with half the world on his side, represented by the global south. Progress on the ground is in full swing, which means that it is Putin who, in the event of negotiations with the United States, will set the tone for them. And of course, he will not make any compromises that contradict Russian interests. In general, friends, get ready to hear the curious arguments of the Swiss journalist. So, friends, let's go. Before I start, I want to say a few words. Donald Trump, with his usual confidence and arrogance, declared that he was capable of ending the conflict within 24 hours. This statement was loud, effective, and quite in the spirit of the former US president. But how realistic is it? Is it possible that Vladimir Putin, who is now stronger than ever, suddenly decides to sit down at the negotiating table and give in under pressure from American ultimatums? Given the current situation, this seems very doubtful. Today, Putin's position has significantly strengthened on the ground. Russian forces are demonstrating rapid progress. And in the eyes of many countries in the global south, Russia appears as a state capable of defending its interests despite Western pressure. Putin's position at the negotiating table is also quite strong. This is not the first time he has made it clear that he will demand an end to the conflict solely on his own terms. And the use of hazelnuts is just another proof that Russia does not intend to compromise its interests. But that's not all. Putin also intends to return to his proposals made at the end of the 21st year, when he sent a letter to NATO and Washington demanding the creation of a new European security architecture. These proposals included security guarantees for Russia and Western commitments that would preclude further expansion of the alliance. And here the main question arises. Will Trump agree to accept such conditions? Unlikely. Trump, of course, is a master negotiator, or so he claims. I know how to bring Putin to the negotiating table. It sounds like a promise and perhaps even a threat. However, practice shows that Trump is far from the kind of person who is inclined to compromise or make concessions on such issues. Most likely, the negotiation process with his participation will be accompanied by harsh demands and threats against Russia, which clearly will not contribute to achieving a quick peace. As noted by John Mearsheimer, a well-known political scientist and proponent of the theory of international relations, Putin will not give in under pressure from the West, and especially not when the initiative on the ground and the diplomatic front passes into the hands of Russia. Moreover, Mearsheimer stressed that Trump's coming to power would rather toughen the U.S. approach to Russia than lead to any concessions. With this approach, the idea of ending the conflict is more like another loud slogan. It is also worth considering that Putin has never bowed to external pressure, even when the situation was not developing in his favor. Let's recall at least the 22nd year, when a series of sanctions were imposed against Russia, and the supply of Western weapons reached its peak. Despite all these challenges, the Russian leader has not only held his ground, but has also been able to adapt to the new realities. Now, when the situation is clearly developing in Russia's favor, it is naive to expect concessions from Putin. Trump's emotional statements about a quick end to the conflict are probably aimed more at the American voter than at the real players in the international arena. After all, what could be better than to declare that you know how to end a conflict that has been going on for several years in one day? The countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America prefer not to interfere in the conflict and maintain relations with Moscow. This is a weighty argument in the negotiations, which gives Putin additional leverage. In these circumstances, the Russian leader is unlikely to compromise because he has a clear goal: to achieve fulfillment of his demands, namely recognition of Russia's interests and a review of the security system in Europe. Thus, it is not worth expecting that the arrival of Trump will dramatically change the course of the conflict. Rather, as Mearsheimer correctly pointed out, we will see an even tougher approach to Russia from the United States, which is unlikely to bring us closer to a peaceful solution. The conflict is likely to continue, and Vladimir Putin, as before, will go to the end until all his demands are fulfilled. And now, as promised, friends, we turn to the words of the Swiss journalist. But first, I want to introduce you to him. Roger Keppel is a well-known Swiss journalist, politician, and publisher. He is the editor-in-chief and owner of the reputable Weltwoche publication, widely known for his analytical articles and provocative points of view. Keppel is actively involved in the political life of Switzerland, being a member of the National Council from the Swiss People's Party. His journalistic work is characterized by bold views and the ability to raise sensitive issues, which makes him one of the key figures in the European media space. Now listen to what a Swiss journalist who recently visited Russia has to say. This is extremely interesting. Roger Keppel, editor-in-chief of the Swiss newspaper Weltwoche, was initially cautiously preparing for a trip to Moscow, expecting to see an economic crisis, which is often reported by Western media. However, upon arrival, he did not find the signs of collapse that he had been told about. In his report, he wonders, Western goods are available. There is no shortage. Inflation is minimal and not like ours, he notes, wondering about economic stability. He also notes that it's not just lanterns that are lit in Moscow, and adds, they don't save electricity here, like in Germany. Cellular internet is much faster than in Berlin, he continues. Keppel also notes, restaurants and cafes are full. People are walking in the sun, happy, not in tears. And where are the sanctions that the whole world imposed against Russia? He's surprised. Then he said a few words about politics. Friends, here's a quote. I think Putin has largely achieved his goals in this conflict. Of course, this is cynical and cold, and indeed it is because geopolitics requires iron nerves. And we must stop pretending that the West is a union of innocent and noble people. That's not so. Geopolitics is a terrible thing with colossal sacrifices. I don't want to embellish or downplay this, but let's look at it in a bright light. In my opinion, Putin has achieved his goals in this conflict to a large extent. First, he showed the West his teeth. That was the most important thing. I mean, after the Cold War, Western countries no longer took Russia seriously. In the 90s, they thought that they could take away Russia's resources, that it would not be able to resist. But in the end, Putin stood firm and tough in defense of the country. He said, we will not accept this. We are a sovereign state. We deserve respect. We must be taken seriously. The red line was crossed a long time ago. Actually, who would have thought that Russia would accept this? If it hadn't been at the very bottom, the Americans would never have allowed such a thing if Russian or Chinese naval bases had appeared in the Gulf of Mexico. We would have heard about it in Europe as soon as the American nuclear mines opened. But on the contrary, Russia was forced to accept all these conditions, and it was arrogance, dangerous arrogance. Putin responded harshly, showing his muscles, rejecting the West and saying, not an inch to the east. He also prevented attempts by the West to include a well-known country in NATO. Also on the agenda was the issue of the peninsula, where Russia's main naval port is located. Do you seriously think that Russia will just give up this strategic facility? This is a complete utopia. After all, the West initially did not take Russia seriously, betting on its weakness. But Putin did not allow this. In the field of economics, the West hoped that it would be able to break Russia and deprive it of its resources, but to the surprise of even Russian economists, the Russian economy turned out to be much more stable than many expected. Foreign economic pressure has brought Russia closer to China, and now relations with China are much better than before. Although the Chinese and Russians are not friends, they have formed a strategic alliance. As for domestic policy, Putin has also strengthened his position. He got rid of the oligarchs who could threaten his power. Yes, it is an autocracy, but it was the right step, and they perceive Putin as a man who stood up for Russia and its interests against Western arrogance. Thus, Putin is standing much stronger now than before the conflict began. This is good news because it could lead to peace, which in turn would ease aggressive sanctions, especially in the energy sector, as Europe cannot survive economically without cheap resources from Russia. In addition, Germany, in my opinion, will not be able to do without these resources for a long time, and we will find ourselves in a difficult situation. But as a powerful European country, Germany will definitely have the most influence, and relations with Europe will be necessary again. My main hypothesis is that Putin has achieved most of his goals. That's good news if I'm right, because it can also contribute to a truce and an end to these terrible events. I'm looking forward to hearing your opinion on this. Do you agree with my assessment, or do you think this is the wrong approach? As for the news about Putin's missiles, as reported by the German media, Germany is really paying a lot of attention to the upcoming elections. Chancellor Scholz found a common language with Pistorius, and all the tension disappeared. However, I would not hastily claim that Scholz has already lost the election. He has a hidden weapon. This is a Taurus rocket. In my opinion, this is absolutely ridiculous. For me personally, Friedrich Merz is a candidate I would not choose, even if I were Swiss. In Switzerland, we should be afraid if someone comes to power in Germany who wants to escalate this conflict, because this will be a problem for us and for other countries. It surprises me how careless Merz is in his rhetoric. He ignores the European sensibility that has always been present in German politics. This is especially evident in his approach to relations with Putin, as well as in the case of the new Russian missile. This attracts media attention, but it also causes concern. The end of the journalist's quote. Meanwhile, friends, the outlines of Trump's peace plan, published by the American media with reference to officials of his team, have begun to be announced in the United States. Donald Trump's conflict resolution plan for Eastern Europe looks more like a diplomatic joke than a real tool for achieving peace. The points proposed in it look like a dictate of conditions for one side, which in no way can be called mutually beneficial. According to this document, Russia must make numerous concessions and actually comply with the demands of the other side, while the United States assumes the role of an arbitrator, who, of course, will ensure justice. But if you dig deeper, it becomes clear that justice here is seen solely through the prism of American interests. Let's look at this in more detail. First, Russia should receive limited sanctions relief if it agrees to negotiate. That's a really generous gesture from Washington. It turns out that Moscow should simply declare its readiness to participate in the negotiations, and for this it will be allowed to breathe a little easier. A limited relaxation of sanctions is like removing half of the handcuffs and offering a helping hand, but in such a way that the person understands that at any moment the handcuffs will snap shut again. It is noteworthy that this weakening is offered for real actions. And what prevents the United States from imposing sanctions again as soon as Russia fulfills all the conditions? Moscow has repeatedly stated that such approaches based on the language of an ultimatum are unacceptable to it. If American diplomats have forgotten about this, it is worth reminding. Lifting or easing sanctions is not a bonus that is distributed unilaterally, but an element of mutual respect in the dialogue. Further, the lifting of sanctions is possible, but only if a peace agreement is concluded that the other side likes. Well, the wording is really impressive. Since when have conditions in international diplomacy been assessed on a like or dislike basis? Is this a new legal term? Or are we witnessing the United States introducing norms from school etiquette into international law? The logic is simple. Russia must sign a document that will suit the other side of the conflict. And if not, the sanctions will remain. This completely ignores the fact that negotiations are always a compromise, not a unilateral satisfaction of demands. Perhaps American diplomats have forgotten that international relations do not work according to the principle of charity events, where one side gives something for free to the other. This, of course, partially reflects the idea of Western politics, but in reality such approaches do not always lead to fair and mutually beneficial solutions. In international diplomacy, the most important principle has always been respect for the interests of all parties and the search for compromises, rather than simultaneously meeting the needs of one side to the detriment of the other. It follows from this that the U.S. approach to Russia in the framework of a peaceful settlement looks extremely one-sided and, to put it mildly, short-sighted. No less interesting is the point itself, which concerns territorial disputes, which states that the other side should not abandon the disputed territories, but only resolve these issues exclusively through diplomatic means. At first glance, this sounds like a proposal for a peaceful resolution of territorial conflicts. However, upon closer examination, it can be seen that Russia, in fact, must abandon any strategic advantages, recognize the territorial claims of the other side, and return to discussions that have already been placed in an extremely unfavorable framework for it. This whole process is perceived not as a search for peace, but as an instrument of pressure on one side to force it to agree to terms that it clearly will not accept. In fact, this is not diplomacy but pure dictation, in which the interests of one side are completely ignored. It is obvious from this that the general tone of this plan is highly perplexing, as it looks like something written more for a domestic audience in the United States. The document is being created to show how Washington strives to solve international problems, although in reality it is nothing more than a declaration that has nothing to do with the real peace process. Friends, now I would like to summarize the material and express my opinion. I was very pleased to hear Roger Keppel's honest and unbiased words about Russia and Putin. In today's world, where objectivity sometimes gives way before propaganda, his reporting stands out as a voice of reason and justice. Thank you, Roger, for having the courage to tell the truth and for sharing your impressions openly. We are always glad to see you. Come to Russia again. I am sure there are many more things here that may surprise you. And dear friends, thank you for your attention. Be sure to write your opinion about the material and do not forget to like this video. I wish you good health. See you later.